Today, in my continuing mission to roast the foundations of modern fantasy, we're going to be talking about a series that's been copied and parodied so many times that you probably know the parody better than the series itself. We're talking about Robert Salvatore's Icewind Dale trilogy. Hello everyone, welcome to the Book Cafe, where we review books, talk fantasy, and interview industry professionals. If you're a first-time viewer, I invite you to subscribe. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Okay, so the modern fantasy genre is one of the younger forms of literature. While it has its basis in fairy tales and folk tales, the modern form of it is generally recognized to have entered the mainstream with J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Now, personally, I'm very fond of Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, while my opinions on Tolkien are best kept to myself, lest I be crucified. If you look at fantasy over the years, you can sort of see how it took a while to properly gain its footing. A lot of the best works of fantasy are actually fairly recent, and mostly came about once the genre started gaining popularity. So back in the day, by which I mean like the 80s and 90s, people were a little more starved for fantasy content. And a fair amount of the content that did get published ended up being based on Dungeons and Dragons. So you've got Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms, and Greyhawk, and in part because of this author, Forgotten Realms became very iconic. So in context, the Icewind Dale trilogy is a significant achievement. There's a lot of things that Salvatore does that were not done at the time. However, when I first picked up the Icewind Dale trilogy, I did not know any of the context. And because of that, I'm going to be reviewing the trilogy as a standalone outside of the context that spawned it. Icewind Dale is likely better than most of what came before it, but it's also significantly worse than most of what came after. The writing is solid. That is something that I will give to the story. The prose moves very well, and the action, the tension, the suspense, it's all well done. Here's the problem. It's written not like a novel, but like a D&D campaign. And if you've played a tabletop role-playing game, you'll know that you can't do a one-to-one translation in order to make a novel. The plot works differently. The characters work differently. And I don't think that was something they knew at the time. So the plot of the trilogy meanders very oddly. The first book has an arch plot, and it's structured like a novel. But after that, it sort of loses direction and becomes about the wanderings of this particular group, which would be fine if not for the fact that the characters aren't written particularly well. It's like the author took the class, race, and alignment system, stuck those together into a group of stereotypes, flipped one of them, and then said, okay, I don't need to do any more depth than this. The dwarf and the barbarian are about as stereotypical as a dwarf and a barbarian get, and they don't have a lot of character development. The romance subplot feels weird and underdeveloped. The barbarian and the archer are supposedly in love, but that's never really shown, just told. The really interesting character is Drizzt Do'Urden, who's a dark elf who's turned against his people. And at the time, that was revolutionary. The problem is that by now, Do'Urden has been copied and parodied so many times that he's no longer unique. And the things that made him interesting no longer allow him to stand out. He's gone from a fascinating and unusual character to just one of a million. And that's not Salvatore's fault. He made an iconic character, and everyone else copying that icon kind of cheapened it. Overall, if this were the 80s, and we didn't have the fantasy books that we do now, I would recommend Icewind Dale. But the context of the modern day is different. We're not as desperate for content as we used to be. And there's so much better out there. So if you really want to learn more about the history of the fantasy genre, then yeah, pick it up. It is part of the foundation. But if all you're looking for is a good read, I would put this at borrow. This is a read it once and then give it back. Have you read Icewind Dale or any of Salvatore's works? Do you disagree with me? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to show it by clicking the like button, click here on the dragon to subscribe, or here for more videos like this from the Book Cafe. We'll be updating our next video on Sunday, so until then, read good fantasy.